working for you. A weekly talk radio program which highlights developments of national interest and the activities of your St. Kitts Nevis government. Join host Les Roy Williams as he presents news, views, reports, and interviews about everything regarding the activities of the Team Unity government and the building of our communities and the development of St. Kitts Nevis. Tune in and call in to interact with your government and share your views regarding the upward forward development of your community and our beautiful Twin Island Federation. Working for you is weekly, every Wednesday live from 1:30 p.m. to 3 p.m. on ZIZ Radio, Win FM, and Sugar City FM with rebroadcast on participating stations. Working for you.
A pleasant afternoon to all of you who have tuned in to Working for You today. I am your host, Les Roy Williams. Today we are going to be having a very important discussion on civil aviation. I have with me today Mr. Royston Griffin, who is the Senior Civil Aviation Officer. Mr. Griffin, welcome to this program.
Thank you.
The world has changed. Travel has become a lot easier because of technological advances in transportation. Land, air, sea, on the ground transportation.
Yes.
But we are also much more aware of the dangers posed by travel and those who are evil and misguided. In most recent times, we can think of what has been etched in the annals of history as what we call 9/11, and how it has changed the world of travel. Civil aviation is one of two major categories of flying, representing all non-military aviation, both private and commercial. Most of the countries of the world are members of the International Civil Aviation Organization and work together to establish common standards and recommended practices for civil aviation through that agency.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Griffin, in your own words and using your own experience over the years as the Senior Civil Aviation Officer, how would you define civil aviation to a 5-year-old?
Civil aviation is more or less a means of transport. It is what we use to move from one state to the other. In 1944, they developed what we call the IQ. However, before 1944, they used to have these B-2 bombers, but then they convert them into commercial aircraft. In doing so, they recognize that in order for the movement to be safe, you have to develop standards, so ensure that there are a number of standards and also recommended practices that would help to have a more efficient and a safe operation when it comes to aviation. However, in 2002, the government of St. Kitts and Nevis signed on to what we call the Chicago Convention, which is Doc 7300, which is ICAO, which for the listening public, if you don't understand what ICAO means, it's International Civil Aviation Organization, which is ICAO. That is the global governing body when it comes to setting standards and recommended practices. So in doing so, the government also signed on to other conventions like the Montreal Protocol Convention as amended. Then you have the Hague and the Tokyo, and all these are conventions that we are party to. And it means that we have to meet the Chicago Convention, which Article 37 is what the state must meet, ensuring which we affirm the international arena that we would comply with the standard. However, Article 38 in that same Doc 7300 gives the state an option that if you cannot meet a certain standard, then you're required to sign and write a notice of difference to say this is what we can't meet. Then that would be published so that other member states would see this is what the government of St. Kitts cannot meet, and they would determine whether it's safe or not to go to St. Kitts, travel to St.
Okay.
Also,
No,
you,
sure, go
you
ahead.
spoke earlier about it becomes evil. And I've always used a quote from great Albert Einstein, which said, "The world will not be destroyed by evil, those who do evil, but by those who watch without doing anything." It means that all of us as citizens have a responsibility to ensure that the safety of civil aviation, more so that ICAO state in its document Annex 71.1, Annex 17.2.1 state each contracting state must have as its primary objective the safety of the passenger, the crew, the ground personnel, and the general public in all matters related to civil aviation. More so, St. Kitts and Nevis depends on tourism, and we have to ensure that we protect every resource when it comes to tourism. Because ICAO also states that a state that depends on tourism must ensure that the aviation industry must be on the forefront and the burner of civil aviation and security, because there's no room for error and there's no room for mistake. And we as citizens must realize that our people depend on the tourism product, and we have to do whatever it takes to ensure that our citizens are protected, not just at the operational, but it stems to the gentleman or the lady on the beach who use the aloes to massage and things like that. It stems outward from the perimeters of the airport. And if anything happened at our facility, these are the people who would also be affected. And all of us have to ensure that all standards are implemented effectively and consistently.
Okay, you mentioned some of it, but I'm still going to ask you, what are some of the other roles probably and function of the Civil Aviation Department, or what we call CAD?
The Civil Aviation Department function is to conduct what we call oversight. It is to ensure that the government meets its obligation internationally. Within the ICAO member state, there are 192 member states. So we have to ensure that we meet the standards that were given to us or we sign on to. So we ensure that we conduct inspections, we conduct testing, we conduct surveying, auditing, risk assessment, training, and also we do investigation if there is need for investigation based on law.
Okay. Now, who staffs the department, and what are some of the qualities that are required for positions in this field?
Well, the Civil Aviation Department started with just myself alone from 2009, which I was supported by the Director of Maritime Affairs, which is Mr. McLean Hobson, and I would like to say thanks to Mr. McLean Hobson for giving me the opportunity to work along with him, and also the support while I was within the department. But however, the department then split, and then now civil aviation is on its own, where I have built a foundation, and so now it's myself, Atnell Jordan, and I must apologize for his absence because he is not feeling too well. He have the flu, and another Jessica Body, who is my secretary assistant. Mm-hmm. In order to join the staff, you must have a knowledge of the aviation arena in terms of ICAO standards, you must be familiar with the state legislations and understand how the implementation. ICAO state whether even if you come from a military background or police, you still have to go through the basic training to understand the role and function. So for me to be in this position, I had to do all of the ICAO standard training, which is first one is the National Inspector Training, to ensure that for me to carry out inspection, test, and survey, I am qualified and certified to do so on behalf of the government.
Okay. Now, you have all kind of people that work at the airport, from those who handle baggage,
Yes.
Those who deal with check-in, passenger check-in, those who deal with security.
Yes.
You have air traffic controllers.
Yes.
You have other people who will probably be responsible for cleaning aircrafts, maintaining of the aircrafts, refueling
Yes.
the aircraft,
Private jet operators.
private jet operators, and all of these people who work in this, I would refer to as, it's a sort of a high risk. It's a high risk area.
Yes.
How well and what is put in place to make sure that people understand the whole thing about safety, airport safety and security.
Well, it is required by ICAO that one, every person that work in the area must go through what we call an awareness training. So we have done a number of awareness training, customs, police, defense force, airlines, SCASPA staff, and tenants, because the thing is they are working in this area, and ICAO always refer to what we call the basic concept of security is defense in depth. And defense in depth means levels and layers of security built upon each other. So when you work in the airport and you have been issued an airport ID pass, you now become a part of the airport system. So that is why they do also the ID badge awareness, to make you aware of what is expected and your limitation in where you could go from where you can't go, and how it must be worn, and these things. And this is something that is ongoing. We have, for the year so far, we have already trained at least 140 something persons, which include the firemen and airlines and customs officers.
Okay, now ICAO, as you said, is the world governing regulatory body
Yes.
for civil aviation.
Yes.
St. Kitts and Nevis is a member of ICAO.
Yes.
What are some of the benefits of being a member of that world body?
Well, some of the benefits is that training being offered, and also technical assistance.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, ICAO embark on a system which they call No Country Left Behind. So what they would do, they'll come out, do their, well, not audit. They used to do audit, but as of 2012, they changed it from being an audit to what we call a CMA. When we speak about CMA, it follows the pattern of an audit, but is what they call continuous monitoring assessment. The reason for that, because we have gone through 2 series of audits already, so they come back to assess. So it's a continuous monitoring assessment system to see how far we are and how are we implementing the standards and recommended practice. Because in 2.2 of the Annex 17 it states each contracting state shall implement all standards and shall endeavor to implement every recommended practice. So they come back to ensure that we implementing all the standards and the recommended practice. More so that on a regular basis, ICAO, based on the threat, and they have discussed it at the different panels, which the World Customs Organization and different agencies are a part of the security committee that to discuss challenges and how they fix these things in aviation. So they've done a number of amendments, and because of these amendments, we have to update our legislations and our programs to make sure that these are in keeping with the standard of ICAO. Because ICAO state that if a state aviation security is weak and there's no enforcement, it means that our system would threaten the worldwide of aviation, and that is in keeping with ICAO Doc 1047.
Okay, could you tell me what some of the standards, you keep speaking about standards, so it simply means that we have to have standards.
Yes.
And what are some of the standards that St. Kitts and Nevis is held to internationally when it comes to civil aviation? What are some of the major ones?
The standards are, first we must have a legislative framework, because in 2.1.1, as I said, it states that we must have the protection of safety passengers, crew, ground personnel, and general public. 2.1.2 state that each constructing state shall establish an organization, which that organization is the Civil Aviation Department, and we must develop regulation and ensure implementation of procedures and practices. It goes on to say in 2.13 that each contracting state shall ensure that that organization and the regulation are implemented to protect the safety of the passengers, crew, ground personnel, and the general public, taking into account the efficiency of the flight. Also, that's part A of 2.13. Then B state that the state also shall ensure that we are capable to respond rapidly to any increased threat. Other standards are that it states that we must establish an administrative and appropriate authority within the government administration. So the government administration, the appropriate authority now is Mr. Honorable Mark Brantley. He is the appropriate authority based on the ICAO requirement. Within that system, the organization functions. So what we do, we are responsible for reporting to him. So when I go to the airport, you must not just don't see Griffin. I'm representing a minister, I'm representing a government, and also representing the people of this federation and beyond, because whatever we do here in St. Kitts and Nevis could affect regionally and internationally and have far-reaching implications for us.
Yes. Now, aviation security is paramount.
Yes.
What are some of the standards and recommended practices? We speak about standards, but standards is different to practices.
Yes.
So I may have a standard, this is the standard, but then practice is what has to be implemented.
Right.
It has to be implemented. So how do you go about meeting these, implementing these practices, which of course arise out of these standards?
Right. So what would first happen? We have to have the appropriate training. We have to ensure that the people are trained properly to enforce and implement these standards. Some of the standards is like access control, screening of passengers, and cabin and hold baggage. We have also patrolling. We ensure front and terminal. Front and terminal patrol now becomes the new amendment in the Annex 17 to ensure that a front and terminal is clear so that you could visually observe any act of unlawful interference. We have standards for cargo. All cargo shall be screened. And there are different methods that you've been taught how to screen the cargo using canine unit, X-ray machine, hand, and different things. Also, how you respond to act of unlawful interference, the standard of implementation of a national program, how you go about doing that, step by step. And also they give you a draft template in terms of how you go about doing that. Also in 3.4, it tells you part of the standard is that it said persons who implementing security measures must be trained and certified to ensure that there's effective and consistency in the implementation of all security measures. We also looked at aircraft security. Those are standard and practices in terms of access control to aircraft, screening and searching of aircraft, and also in terms of ramp operations and things. So there are a number of those standards that we practice, but most of all, you have to do training, and not just train and leave you. You have to complete what we call an OJT, which is 40 hours you have to complete, and then you've been tested to say whether or not you meet. And it is a base where we base it on knowledge, skill, and competency.
No, this is serious responsibility. Now, you mentioned acts of unlawful interference.
Yes.
What are those?
ICAO definition for act of unlawful interference is that these are acts or attempted acts such as to jeopardize civil aviation, but not limited to unlawful seizure of aircraft, hostage taking, also the use of an aircraft to injure or cause damage or damage to any property, forcible intrusion into an aircraft, an airport, or an aerodrome facility, false communication of information, sabotage of an aircraft on the ground, or as we say, hijacking in the air or on the ground. So these are what, and terrorism also a part of act of unlawful interference. So when you go to the airport, you still have to be cognizant of what you do and what you say.
Right. You just can't go there and say anything.
No.
So I can't go up to the airport and say, well, look, I have a bomb.
No.
It's going to be taken seriously.
Yes, because especially in today's world when we have social media, and because of the incident of 9/11, it still have fear within people. And because of that, there are rules at the airport and signs which state that what you can't say in terms of bomb and hijack and all these things, because some people would interpret it differently. So there are rules and laws that you just can't say.
Just like you don't shout fire in a crowded theater.
Right. And you know, sometimes, as I usually tell the passengers and people, that if you see a friend and his name is Jack, be very careful to say hi Jack at the airport, because
Right.
somebody say hi Jack, it could create a disturbance, you know.
Certainly.
So I always make the joke telling them, be careful of what you say. But what I want to say also is that we must remember that our livelihood depends on this industry. What affects the air affects the sea. What affects the sea affects the air. And all that I ask is,
What about the land?
well,
it affects the land too.
The land too, because the
Mhm.
people, the citizens, is who are gonna suffer.
So we don't
And
live in
all
the
of
air.
us.
We
And-
don't live on the sea.
But we live on land.
We live on land. These are only things to facilitate us
Exactly.
in terms of getting to land.
Right.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, when the industry collapses, all of us would suffer. And it takes years, because the credibility of the government and the state itself would go, and there would be a lot of questions. And that is why I take what I do very serious, without fear, favor, malice, or ill will. As I said to you some time ago, the former commissioner Foy taught me, well, as a police, when I joined the police force, that I must carry 4F in my pocket.
You have to be careful how you say that.
Well, it is that you must be fair to people, you must be friendly, you must be firm, but don't be too familiar. And then the other day he told me, carry these to sea. You must be committed to your job and you must demonstrate competency. And I take this as a challenge because it is serious responsibility. Every day I wake up with the whole nation on my shoulder, because what is it that we can do to ensure that the people that entrust and pay us are safe when they travel? And
Yes.
I'll ensure that that is what happens.
Okay. Earlier on, you spoke about civil aviation and that there has to be legislation
Yes.
surrounding civil aviation. Now, what legislation do we have locally that speaks to civil aviation practices?
Well, we have what we call the Civil Aviation Act first started out, because without these legislation, the standards and recommended practices of ICAO cannot be implemented. It's just like you have a dog without teeth. There's no bite. The purpose of the legislation is to enforce, and that you must have penalties to make sure that people don't break these laws. So we have the Civil Aviation Act, which is amended at 8.03 of 2009, and we have the Civil Aviation Regulation, which is 13 of 2012. However, coupled with that, we have what we call the national program, because in 3.1 of Annex 17, it tells you each contracting state shall develop a national program. So out of that national program, it combines a number of other legislation, because it's not just about civil aviation, but it has responsibility for all different stakeholders. For example, there's responsibility for the health department, agriculture, responsibility for customs, responsibility for defense force, responsibility for foreign affairs, national security. All these stakeholders are stakeholders that this department that I'm responsible for have to go out and audit all these stakeholders. Immigration. So we do audit on immigration, all of these stakeholders, national security, to ensure that the standards are implemented effectively and consistently. So within the legislation, we have the Firearm Act, we have the Customs Act, we have the Anti-Terrorism Act, Section X to support these document, which is the national program. Also within the national program, we have to, it is required that we develop what we call a National Civil Aviation Committee, because whatever we do at the airport affects all these agencies. So on that committee, the tourism department, the police, defense force, we have the SCASPA, we have NASPA, we have also the ministry itself sits there. So all the stakeholders, the senior, because it is a body that helps to regulate and make recommendation to the office, through the minister, to ensure that the effectiveness of the civil aviation obligation that we have worldwide are implemented. And I think that the office has been recognized by people regionally and internationally, and I want to say thanks to the Honorable Minister Mark Brantley for his support over the years, and ensuring that we are doing what we're supposed to do, and in supporting that whenever we do our job, he is always aware of what we're doing, and anything happen, it is required upon me to ensure that I report to him directly. Also the PS, she's very supportive in what we do, and I want to say to them publicly, thanks for all their encouragement, because it's not an easy job. It is a job where you meet challenges, but success does not come by wishful thinking. It comes by hard work and dedication. And if you love it, just go on doing it.
You are very correct. Now, the Civil Aviation Act, which you made reference to, of course, there are changes
Yes.
that go along, of course, in the air travel industry.
Yes.
And it simply means then that no act, no legislation is set in stone.
Exactly.
And so therefore there can be amendments
Yes.
made to that legislation, which I am sure have happened from time to time. Now, just recently, I think there was an amendment made to the Civil Aviation Act. Could you tell us what that amendment was and the purpose for the amendment?
The amendment to the Act is in keeping with ICAO standards and recommended practice, where we have to review our legislation. ICAO gave us the minimum standard that any member state must meet. You cannot go below. You must maintain a level or exceed and go higher. If you go below, then the state be found wanted, and they could publish administrative documentation, publish it on a secure website that other member states could see, and then they question the credibility of the operation. So as the amendment comes to 8973, Annex 17, whatever it is, document from ICAO, we have to review all our documents to ensure that we insert those sections of that document. So recently there's what we call the 10th edition of DOC 8973, which sets the guidance on how member states must meet the standard in Annex 17. So Annex 17 tell you this is what you must do, but 8917 say, hey, this is how it must go. So whenever there's an audit by ICAO, those two documents is what they use to ensure that our national program are in sync with these, because there's a tier system, and then it goes into a legislation, then it goes to the appropriate, then it goes to qualification and training, and all these are critical elements that ICAO looked at. And then it goes all the way down to act of unlawful interference, and then it goes into facilitation, which is Annex 9, Doc 9734, which these are part. So we had to review, and then we had recently an audit, and with the audit, we recognized that there are some adjustments that we have to make in keeping with the 10th edition, because this is the latest edition of 2017, which was released in around March in last year. So what actually happened, that amendment bill is to give the Civil Aviation Department and those of us who are enforced more powers, more authority in terms of enforcing and ensuring that the implementations are effectively and consistently implemented. Because sometimes they are implemented, but you're circumventing. And the regulation subsection 94 state, no person shall circumvent or cause another person to circumvent any procedure, standard, measures, or programs in accordance with the regulation. Mm-hmm. So you can't take the shortcut, because if you take the shortcut, you could be penalized, and then it tell you what the penalties be, and it send you back to the act, which there are some fines like $50,000 and imprisonment and all these things. So we had to make sure that our act is in keeping with what is required of us, and ensuring that when there are definition changes, or act speak to the definition changes in like act of unlawful interference, they insert a number of things. So we had to make sure that it's balanced across the board.
Now, earlier you spoke about you cannot afford, or one cannot afford, when they're working in such an area, field, to make mistakes.
Yes.
One mistake can jeopardize hundreds of lives.
Yes. And that is why,
you know, you're doing screenings, you're doing all of this for hazardous whether it is chemicals, equipment, firearm, whatever it is, and one mistake,
Right.
and somebody slips through with an evil intention, can create untold disaster.
Right. So that is why it is in keeping with 3.4 of Annex 17, 3.46. That is why each state are required to conduct the inspections, the testing, the surveying, and the auditing. These are the mechanisms used to ensure that people stay current. These are the mechanisms that people stay abreast and not lapsing. Because a number of, I do some case studies when I do training to let security understand the seriousness and what is there. Because of lack of quality control, we call it, it tends to leave a gap in the system, and the person perpetrator monitors everything, and they use the opportunity. And a number of it happens because of lack of testing, lack of inspection. Not inspection that I would say, Jane, I'm coming over tomorrow. Because if I tell Jane I'm coming tomorrow, Jane would clean the house, Jane would put on the best dress, Jane would cook. So if I go, I just can't see the real person that I'm dealing with. So that is why ICure gives us an opportunity to say, unannounced inspection. So I would show up and say, I'm here to carry out an inspection. And in the inspection, you would see the real essence of the implementation, and you make the notes, and then you ask for corrective measures to correct these. Because remember, we say effectively and consistently. So whether I'm there or not, we expect that it would go smooth. Yes, there is no zero risk. There's always a risk, but it must be minimal that you could control. The testing is what helps to make sure that you don't make the mistake at the wrong time. So we do different testing to ensure that the officers are aware of what is expected. We do different testing, access control, screening of bags, different forms of testing to make sure that they are in keeping with what is required. And the whole thing, if you fail a test, you have to go through remedial and go through. And for you to get certified, you have to do 5 exams. You can't fail one. You have to do the full 5, pass the full 5.
Yes.
In order to be certified.
Yeah.
And then we do refresher training every year, and we do recurrent, which Monday gone was the last batch of recurrent training for Scasper. And actually this afternoon I'll be doing some more training with the airlines.
Right. Because if anything happens at the airport, anything adverse, the whole security apparatus, the whole security staff, the integrity of the system,
Yes.
and everything will be called into question.
Yes.
I have heard of people traveling from Africa to London in the wheel well of a jumbo jet. How did they pass through airport security and get into the wheel well? Some of them survived the journey because I'm told that it gets very cold.
Yes.
The higher the altitude,
Yes.
at 40,000 feet, sometimes and more.
Yes.
Some survive, some don't. But how do you get in there? And how do you pass through all of that airline security to get in the wheel well of a Boeing jumbo jet?
There are a number of factors that could happen here. One, intrusion into the aerodrome, unknown, lack of probably patrols, CCTV monitors not being functioned, or they are functioning but nobody there to man them. And these are things that IQ speak about, that if you have a CCTV system and then it's just working and no one manning it, it's just as useful, because it's only after the fact when the damage done. And sometimes you can't even replay it because it destroy in the process. So you monitor and then you could respond. The other factor is it could be through the issue of collusion. And that is why a part of the Annex 17 and the IQ docket, it's speaking now to what we call insider threat. Because the greatest threat to the system is the people that work within it. And I always tell staff at the airport, don't grant me no favor, because if you grant me a favor, that's the last favor you'll ever grant. Screen me, show me that you're doing your job, and don't let me see you grant anyone no favor, because you're exposing the public at risk. So you do what you have to do. And in the event that when people wouldn't want to be screened and they slip through the system, it creates a problem, because if something happened, you could end up in prison for something you have no clue, because the question is, who passed here? I didn't go to the screening process. And as far as I see, you're the one who do it, until I could get something different.
No one is above the screening process.
No one, because that is why ICAO state in 4.2.6, all persons other than passengers and personal items carried within shall be screened before entering any security restricted or sterile area. It means all.
Yes, now you know before, screening is a lot stricter
Yes.
post 9/11.
Yes.
Now, before, you simply used to have to walk through a metal thing, but now they're asking you to take off your shoes, and they're asking you to take off your belt. They're asking you to take off your watch sometimes, any sort of anything metallic.
Yes.
They're asking you now to take out your laptops, and to not just take them out. In some cases, they ask you to turn them on.
Yes.
And send them through. Now, what is the purpose of all of that? Some of them have been implemented since
Yes.
9/11 occurred.
But
What's the whole thing about the laptop and so on?
the thing is that the terrorists never stop thinking. They always look at the game plan to see how your operation goes, and then what can I do next to circumvent the system. The whole idea of the laptop and the cell phone and iPads is that they started to use them by putting explosives in them. Some people put drugs in it and seal it. I don't know if anyone ever looked at the case in England where a young lady gave an elderly a laptop to take to England to give her cousin.
So they take out whatever and then they pack it with whatever.
They take off the back of the laptop, use a foil paper, put the drugs in it, put it back together, and then so it looked like a laptop. So the X-ray machine detect it when the lady reached England, and the officer said something is wrong, and she, following her gut feeling, the laptop the young lady gave the elderly lady had drugs in it. They also use it to put explosive. Now, using a laptop, there's an IED, an incendiary device. IED have 4 components, and incendiary device have 2. So what actually, especially when it comes to cell phone, you put the explosive, you set it up in the cell phone, and then in setting it up in the cell phone, you eliminate one of the components, which is the timer, because the cell phone, when you call the cell phone, it triggers and then you go. The other thing is that there are tablets look like tablets, but they are guns. Now, I usually show students these videos. They are also cell phone, like smartphone, look like a smartphone, but it's actually a gun. And these are the things that they've been sold in shops and things like that. And that is why you have to be serious with it, and the issue of the explosive in tablets and laptops and iPads and things. So that is why the US now send out an SD that air carriers must use ETDs at last point of departure into the US to ensure that none of that, and on a random continuous basis. So you go by the airport and you see them have a machine there and they calling you over and they swabbing your pants and different things
Yes.
and your laptop. That is a part of the system pertaining to the question you asked, to ensure that you didn't have any explosive, intact with any explosive or thing like that.
One must admit that it gets a little bit uncomfortable, especially when you have to take off your belt and take off your shoes and have to put them on and so on. But at the very same time, I think it brings home the point how serious a risk
And there's no
and how
risk.
serious security is taken in this day and age.
Right, because for example, you talk about the cell phone, the belt, you talk about the shoes, the shoe bomber that draw the attention worldwide. The other thing with the belt is that it looks like a belt, but it's a dagger. When you screen it, I have many images that we show officers. When you screen it, it is like a belt buckle, but there's a long pointed that could use. That is why IQ put within its program, its regulation, prohibited items and dangerous goods, and officers must be aware. There are 5 categories of prohibited items, and there are also 9 categories of dangerous goods. So you must be in a position to identify what is dangerous goods, and officers must be aware of what are the prohibited items. Even if you have a son traveling with you and you say you purchase a toy gun, a toy plastic gun, IQ requires you, that cannot go in the cabin of an aircraft. It cannot go because it's a replica of a firearm. It could set off other stuff. Children do stuff, but those stuff. So you have 5 categories: 1 firearm, 2 blunt object, 3 pointed object, 4 noxious and toxic, and then 5 chemicals. So officers must have an idea of what are these categories and be able to identify them at every checkpoint, preventing them from going in the cabin. Some of them could travel in the whole baggage, in the checked baggage. So you have options to take it back to the counter for the airlines to assist you in putting it inside there, but not allow in the cabin.
Oh.
And especially when it comes around chemical stuff, there are some chemical stuff you just can't carry in the cabin because it could affect other passengers. So you have to put them in the hold, or if not, you must ship them as cargo.
Now I know that the CAD is responsible as well for providing air traffic control services
Yes.
to all aircraft into St. Kitts and Nevis. Now, what kind of training do air traffic controllers receive? And of course, it is serious air traffic control because one error can spell disaster. I mean, St. Kitts and Nevis, our airport is not as busy as some of the airports, but sometimes I've looked at the sky, sometimes they have maps, and you see hundreds,
Like ants' nest.
like an ant's nest,
Yes.
aircrafts in the air. And you wonder to yourself, how it is they're not colliding into each other.
Air traffic. Air traffic controllers. Air traffic controller have to do air traffic safety rules. They have to go and train in. Most of the air traffic controllers go to Trinidad for approximately close to a year to study, and then they do their OJTs and things like that. It is a tedious job. It is a job that people need to respect the air traffic controllers. They need to be supported and encouraged, because it is not a job that anyone could just walk into and give instruction, because it takes time to understand traffic separation system and flights in terms of landing. So it is really, and all their training are in keeping with ICAO requirements to make sure that they understand air traffic control, the safety aspect and things. They are the one who control the airport. It's like if air traffic control decide no working, nothing, the airport closed.
Sure. Okay,
And
that's
they
right.
and so we as citizens need to support them as much as possible and encourage them, because it's not easy when you have 3-4 flights landing one behind the other. You have to think, and you still have to ensure they park properly. So the training that they do is what is in keeping with ICAO
Okay.
standard and also IATA.
Right. Now, in what consists your aviation security program? I know that there are a number of things. From my research, you would have the National Civil Aviation Program. You'll have the National Training Program.
Yes.
You'll have the National Quality Control Program.
Yes.
You will have the National Certification Program.
Yes.
And you have the Airport Certification Program, and still you have standard operating procedures.
For the airport.
That for the airport. That's quite a bit.
Well, these programs was established as a result of, again, Standard 3.1, which state that you shall establish, implement, and develop a national program. So the national program, from the legislation, it goes to the national program. So it's a flow. And then the national program, Annex 17, still tell you in 3.46 that you must develop what we call a training program to ensure all stakeholders and agency are appropriately trained. So within the national program, agencies have their section in it in terms of what type of training they must complete, and it's based on ICAO standards and the training. And the national program is what say what need to get done, and then we put it. So out of the national program, there are a number of babies, I usually call them. So out of the national program, you have your quality control program, because it speaks to quality control in section 8. Then you have your training program, which is a part of 8. Then you have your airport security program. So each one must flow in a consistent way. So whenever we go to the airport, we look to see, hey, this is what you're not meeting. So whenever we write a report, it is not my opinion, it is, hey, this is what we observe, this is recommendation for us to fix it together, and this is the area of the standard or the legislation that you're not meeting. It means that we have to fix this thing. And in fixing it, what we usually do, we would send the report back and copy it to the minister, and then ask whichever entity to send what you call a corrective action plan, stating you identify and the deficiency, and also with the corrective action plan, you must give us the department that would be responsible for correcting it and a time frame. And then that comes back, we review. If you are satisfied, we accept. If we are not satisfied, it's required by ICAO standard that we will send it, and you have to do it over again, so that we would be, because you can't tell me a hole in the fence, you don't tell me 3 months, because that's something need to be done urgently. So we have those that long-term, short-term, and medium-term implementation, but it must be clearly identified on this corrective action plan. So all these programs come right down to the standard. So the standard operating procedure tells you now step by step how you go about doing this for baggage search, screening, how you go about doing a vehicular search, access control procedure, everything. So the officer at the checkpoint, they have one, and you give them every step by step, word for word, how you go about meeting and doing your job.
Okay, good. Now, at the end of the day, who carries out airport inspections, and how often is it done?
Well, airport inspection, we carry out inspection for airport as a state oversight body, which their responsibility. But 3.47 of Annex 17 and the national require that every entity must have what we call an internal quality control mechanism to ensure that the implementation of their program and in keeping with the national program. So when we go in to inspect, we are going to ask, so when was the last time you had an inspection? What were the findings?
Mhm.
Show me the corrective action plan. So in that aspect, they must have their internal quality control mechanism. Without an internal quality control mechanism, you could have chaos
Mhm.
because everything would go out of order. And that is the engine that keeps the system moving forward.
Okay. Now, what role does the TSA, of course, that's the Transport and Security Administration, where does it fit into the whole aviation security system?
So TSA is they are our partner, and they become our partner also because we have all these U.S. carriers, and all U.S. carriers are regulated by TSA, and they have a program. But what TSA looks for is no different from what we look for. Because when TSA come to St. Kitts to do an assessment, whether on an air carrier or the airport, aerodrome, then what actually happened? They are saying to you, we are here to ensure that you are in keeping with, you are implementing ICAO standards and recommended practices, not TSA standards. So whenever, that's why I tell people, when I'm talking, tell me about ICAO. Because if we meet the ICAO standard, TSA have nothing to worry about. But if we just settle for the mediocre, we have a problem, and a serious one. Okay, it means that we are not going after what we're supposed to. So TSA is our partner, and in keeping with 2.4 of Annex 17, it speaks to international cooperation.
Now, what clout would TSA have, or ICAO? For example, if they've carried out some sort of evaluation, some sort of a check, and they found that the airport was not operating at the standard for which it was operating, and some of the practices that should have been implemented are not implemented, what is the worst scenario that we can have here in St. Kitts and Nevis?
Well, the first of all, what they would do, they would write the state. In writing the state, they would send a report to tell you these are the areas they're not doing and you need to fix it. It goes with a process. And then every time they come back, the previous report, they assess it before they come. And then they come again and they realize there's no change. And then they go and come again and there's no change. Then they would ask to meet with maybe a government official to say, hey, this is the case. We have a choice. It's either you comply, or they have the worst case for us to happen is that they stop all the U.S. carriers, even if it's one. Because if you pull one, all gone. So the worst case is that they pull one because they are not satisfied, and then the others would follow.
Okay.
So what actually happened? They don't just come one time and see something and say, well, okay, this is it. They build cases, and in building these cases and you reach to a certain level, then what they would do, they write a stronger letter, and then what they would do, force the air carriers to enhance security. Now that not a good sign, because if they force carriers to enhance security, what that would mean is that after the passengers are screened by our local security, then they have to go through 100% screening again by the airline staff at the gate. That would really create delays, and turnaround time would increase because if a flight of 200 persons, every single one got to go, bags got to be screened, they have to go through the pat down process, they have to be separated, and that would take time. So if that is the case, then you know that flights would take, and then they would publish it on social media to state that, well, it is not safe. But by the aircraft pull back, the corporate for these aircraft would post and say, last point of departure of SKB is not safe. If you want to travel, you're on your own. That draws the international attention, and then the government would come into questioning about what is happening here. And that is why I take this thing very serious, because the thing is that at the end of the day, we would suffer, all would suffer, and then it takes years to rebuild a reputation. And even though you might get a flight, they still would have some doubt in terms of you. So the implication could be great, and it could be a long, long pull. So I am saying that.
So we have to avoid reputational damage.
Yes.
By, of course, abiding by the standards and implementing the practices
Yes.
of the ICAO.
Yes.
Sure.
And also TSA gives from time to time what we call SD. SD is what we call security directive. Based on threat towards a U.S. aircraft, they would ask for a member state to support them in, for example, 311, liquid gel and aerosol, 3.4 ounces, 1 quart size Ziploc bag and 1 bag per person. That never used to be. You had you drink and you just move through. But because of the liquid bombing situation and thing, then they implemented the 311.
For their flights.
Yes.
Going in, all flights going
but
into the US.
as long as you're within within a terminal that have mixed combination of regional thing, you have to implement it. Because if we had a terminal just all US carriers and none, but I can tell you, as long as there's a mixture, you got to implement it.
Okay.
So there's no separation. So some people would say, I just go in Antigua. Yes, so many things could happen because you're going into another international operation space.
Yes.
I don't know where this stuff that you would take and go through, you could hand it over to somebody else. Again, collusion is something that could always happen. It's just that the right people think, and we have to think one step ahead. All we got to do is to comply and implement. Not just implement, but effectively implement all standards and recommended practices.
Now, there is a geographical delineation in terms of our airspace.
Yes.
There is?
Yes, with the airspace, I can tell you that each member state must pay attention to the airspace above. So that is why the air traffic controller, any aircraft that want to pass over the airspace of St. Kitts to go into another state, they must request permission. And then the air traffic controller would say whether it's clear or not to do so.
Okay, fine. Now I'll ask you one question just before we go to the phone lines. Just recently, flights were grounded for hours at Heathrow Airport in London. And there could be no landing either because drones were sighted flying within the prohibited area.
Yes.
A similar occurrence took place as well at Gatwick in London. Now, do we have any sort of legislation with respect to the flying of drones in the Federation? They're becoming more and more popular to drone technology. Of course, a lot of those nice photos and so that we have from aerial photos, you know. Do we have any?
Well, actually, we are working on the regulation for drones. Drones will fall under the 8.03 as seen as an aircraft, an unmanned aircraft. So there are policies that we are working on and we are reviewing. We have several meetings with the different stakeholders, police, customs, to put this draft legislation together to ensure that we are in keeping their guidance from IQ also in terms of how we handle drones. So very shortly, that would go before the minister and then taken to parliament, so that, because we too recognize that after we have done a risk assessment some time ago, that drone is a very, very, very serious piece of instrument, and part of it that anyone out there who have a drone shortly would have to register the drone. And then after registering those drones, there are certain guidance that they have to comply with in terms of operating the drone, whether it's commercial or for private use. There would be areas that they are prohibited from flying, and also there would be a policy that when you order a drone, you cannot clear the drone unless you register the drone, so that we could have an account and tracking of who actually have a drone. Also, you, based on what you're going to do, you would have to communicate with the control tower. So you would also soon have to probably have insurance, because a drone flying could lose control and damage property. So insurance is one of the things that we are thinking about considering, which is also a part of what is required. And also we are looking at the person must be trained to handle the drone, and a drone cannot operate without being in line of sight, because you want to make sure that a drone is not just a toy, it could be a weapon at the same time. And
That's
also
right.
it is a concern of people just using drone and invading people's privacy and thing. I mean, there are cases upon cases that reports that people by their pool lying down hear noise of a drone, and when
Over the pool taking pictures or
yes,
videos.
and of the individual wife, and then as soon as she took the phone, the drone fly away. But where the operator, he's somewhere, he could see what's happening, but the person cannot see the individual, so they can't see themselves, and it is a concern. And that is why we kind of restrict when drone operators from outside ask for drone to be used in St. Kitts, as long as it's not in collaboration with the tourism department or so, or a local person doing business, then it is a concern, because I don't know what you're going to do with the image. You could sell it, you
Yes.
could use it for other activity that could hurt the state. So we have to be very careful of authorizing people in flying
Certainly.
drones.
Mr. Griffin, I want to get some callers in on this program. So we are going to open the phone lines. The local number to call is 465-2555, and the overseas number is 1718-577-2916. That is the local number, is 465-2555, and the overseas number is 1718-577-2916. There are no callers on the line at the moment, so we would continue our discussion. Now, what is the role of ECA? ECA is the Eastern Caribbean Civil Aviation Authority. What is its role?
ECA have a regulatory role when it comes to safety operation of aircraft, aerodrome certification, and also they have responsibility for regional oversight of security also. ECA is the regional body which was formed under the Treaty of Bastille to govern civil aviation in all the OECS member states. So they do register aircraft on behalf of St. Kitts and Nevis, whether it's St. Kitts and Nevis, Antigua, Barbuda, Dominica, whichever state that you wish to register with, they are the one who are responsible for registering, licensing, pilot's license. They also do airworthiness certification.
We have a call. Working with you, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. You speak of the regarding the drone, that there have been consultations with the security services, customs, etc. Have you had consultations with people such as the ham radio operators and other persons?
Not as yet. We are still in the process of reviewing the document, and as we had a meeting last week, we would then, after we put most of what we wanted, then we would bring it to the public for further discussion, so that we could look at other ways and means, so that we could get feedback from the public and also anyone else that wish to share their experience and knowledge with us to build a strong legislation.
Well, I hope that is true, because so often we are promised that there will be public consultation, and the only public consultation we get is when we hear there's a first reading in the House. We never get any input into the actual drafting of the legislation. After all, some of the things that you speak of sound rather onerous. For example, asking every drone operator to have insurance. If I have a drone that has a very limited range of just, maybe a few dozen feet, asking me to, because it's intended for use as a toy by children,
yes,
asking me to take out an insurance policy seems rather onerous. So I would trust that you would genuinely have public input into it before you actually get to the stage of writing legislation.
Yes, what we would do, we draft it, we discuss it, and then what happened there is what we call a ATLB, which is a Air Transport Licensing Board, to review the thing. So we would sit, discuss, and then we would come to the public to get more feedback, because it's not just about us, but we have to look at how what we put in policies would affect other users. And I take your point in terms of using a toy as for insurance and getting an insurance. Those are things that we are considering. It just, I guess the insurance would be just depends on what operation you're using and the extent and the range of the drone. And
thank you very much
for your input and your concern, and I'll make a note of that also.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, caller. Now, I know we spoke about, various rules and so on for passengers. Now, what are some of the rules for pilots with respect to their jobs?
Well, pilots have rules, and they are governed by, again, the IATA and the IQ standards, TSA and FAA policies, which are a combination. For example, a pilot cannot be found drinking. A pilot, there are limitations in terms of hours of work and these kind of things.
Sleep hours?
Yeah, rest hours. And that's why sometimes at the airport you'll see like 4 pilots on a flight coming from the US, because what? Those who can't take it back because the hours up, so they have to change a flight. So those pilots would change flight and take back the other, not the one that brought it in. There's another crew that would take it out.
Now, are pilots allowed to carry guns?
Well, no, but there's something that you call FAM, which is a federally marshal mechanism. A number of countries in the Caribbean have signed on to it, but it is not that easy to sign on to it. There are a number of things that you got to take into consideration before you could sign on to a FAM agreement. A FAM agreement is more or less an agreement between the U.S. government and a sovereign state.
Okay. Suppose you are a licensed firearm holder and you want to travel with your gun. What is the procedure for doing that?
First, there are procedures written in the national program, the legislation, and air carriers also have what you call written procedures in terms of what to do. First, you have to declare it to the air carrier, notifying them that you have a firearm, and then the air carrier would have someone certify and qualify to check the firearm to make sure it's clear. Then the firearm, if it's going on the aircraft, it cannot go in the cabin.
So it cannot be kept on your person?
No. It has to go in the hole, but you have to follow all the paperwork. The pilot must be informed of the situation. He determines whether he needs it on board or not. He has a say. But in doing so, and it's okay, there's an approval, then the firearm must travel in the cabin in a container which is locked, but not with the rounds. Both ammunition must be separated away from the rounds.
Also, ammunition travels separate too?
In a bag, but separate. In the same bag, but in different container lock. The gun in one and the ammunition in another.
Okay, and what about this is where your point of embarkation. What about the point of disembarkation?
That you
customs and so on, you have to.
Well, the air carrier have a responsibility to report that to the next destination, that on their manifest that this Mr. Williams is on board and seat number XYZ have a firearm, and these are things that's supposed to be reported. Quite often we would have incoming firearm, and sometimes you understand why it happened like that. It is that, you know, in the US people are licensed to bear arms, to carry arms, so flying from one state with a firearm is okay. But sometimes when they check in with a firearm, I guess they don't declare that they are going where they are. They must see where they're going to. But the policies are not enforced in terms of coming, so you find a firearm would end up here. Some time ago I had discussion with TSA, and I said to them that we have to have a fair trade in terms of how firearm is handled. So the trade is that if Williams is coming from North Carolina, direct flight to St. Kitts, and he has a firearm in his custody and thing, all we would like is to send a photo and the relevant information of Mr. Williams, because there could be two Williams on the aircraft. So you show up and you're looking for the wrong Williams, which the other Williams. So if you have an image of the individual, then you could pick out the individual anytime when they arrive at your airport, and deal with the situation before it could even get past you. So it's all about the communication process of relaying information from one state into the other.
Certainly. Now, of course, we were talking about that before, the Eastern Caribbean Civil Aviation Authority, or ECA. What is its role?
Well, as I say, ECA...
Part of it is training?
Part of it is training, yes. They are responsible for training, also training air traffic controllers, training security personnel, anything to do with aviation. Also, they have a responsibility for the training, but it is similar for like what we do, oversight. We do oversight at a state level, but they do oversight at a regional level. And it is, ECA is run by a board.
Okay. Now, I want you to tell the public, what are some of the hazardous items that are prohibited, you're prohibited from traveling with?
Well, some of the stuff, the hazardous stuff, is like you can't travel with a car battery, flares. You can't travel with certain spray, because when you look at the spray, it would have on some dangerous code symbol. So in looking at that, you know for sure that that can't go. You hazardous stuff. You can't travel with liquor over a certain amount of proof, because, and especially in quantity, you have to be careful with that because pressure and thing in the air. You can't travel with brass knuckle. You can't travel, especially in a cabin. You can't travel with clubs in those are for underneath. There are some that could travel on the aircraft, but not in cabin, and then there are some could travel in whole, and there are some that just can't travel on a passenger air carrier. It has to go on a ship it on a cargo aircraft. So.
Okay. Now we have to be wrapping up. I'm just going to ask you two more questions, Mr. Griffin, and one of them has to do with what are some safety tips you would recommend for air travelers?
The safety tips is that always remember the 311 rules. It helps when you go to the airport and you don't have the challenge of security telling you we have to confiscate this, so you store your stuff in the quad size ziploc bag. Make sure they are not over 3.4 ounces, and also you make sure that when you go to the airport and you see unattended bags, you report it to the security air carrier, someone that you could. The whole idea of aviation, if you see something, say something, because the life you save could be your very own. And we have to get away from this system of, oh, that had nothing to do with me. Aviation is everyone's business. It's not just it's not just the security at the checkpoint, it's not just the air carrier, but every single citizen and every traveler. It is all of us business. And in order for us to have a safe and a secure environment, all of us must be involved to ensure that our state is safe and our traveling public are safe.
Now, one last question before you go. Or maybe I might say two.
No problem.
But what role do upgrades and maintenance to airport infrastructure play in terms of security and safety at the airport?
Well, the maintenance, it requires that you maintain. If you don't maintain, it would go down, and if it go down, then you'll have security problem. Because a safety issue at an airport is a security issue. A security issue becomes a safety issue. And if we are not doing maintenance, for example, if you're not maintaining equipment, especially X-ray machine and all these things, then we could have a serious problem because we have more delay. It means that the security have to now go and screen every single bag by hand. Now that take a toll and brought in fatigue, longer hours, delay of aircraft, and then in doing that, then they would get fatigued and tired, and they might miss one or two of the threat that is there. So the maintenance of equipment, the maintenance of the facility is all about our facilitation and customer service. We want to exceed the expectation of the passenger and the traveling public, because the security is the first line of, the RLB is the first line of defense. They are the first line of defense, and they are the last line of defense when you are reversing the whole thing. So the process must be seamless, and the customer visit must exceed what they expect, and they would encourage other persons to come and enjoy St. Kitts and Nevis.
Right. Now, there has been an increase, of course, in airlift at the RLB International Airport.
Yes.
That definitely means that you have to have an increase as well in terms of staff.
Yes, well,
to meet that demand.
Yeah, as long as you have an increase of airlift and passengers, it puts more pressure on the staff. So you have to increase staff at your screening checkpoints. You have to all screening checkpoints in terms of vehicular, employee access, because there are more staff moving. So you have to double up sometimes, especially on the busy, and then you have to increase on the immigration side and things like that. For now, what we have realized is that the operation have outweighed the facility itself in terms of the capacity of the passengers that now moving through RLB International Airport. So hopefully, maybe that we could start to think about removing the waving gallery so that we could have more space until we could
So you were saying we
expand.
need a bigger airport?
Yes, because more aircraft are showing signal that they want to operate within St. Kitts and Nevis. That is a good sign, but we must have space to accommodate that.
Okay. Now, Mr. Griffin, is there anything you want to say in parting? You know, we've said quite a bit on this program.
I would like to say thank you, and on behalf of my staff and myself, I want to say thank you to those who over the years has supported me, but not only me, the staff and the government and the people of St. Kitts and Nevis in ensuring that we are safe, ensuring that the report. Also, I want to say thank you to the Honorable Mark Brantley, not only from me, but from the staff at SCASPA. They always speak well of Honorable Mark Brantley. Too, when he show up at the airport, he comply with the rules. He makes sure go through the screening, and they feel appreciated. They feel encouraged to be a part when he show up at the facility. And I like to say thank you to Mr. Hapson, Maclean Hapson, my former boss. I really appreciate what he had done for me, and also what he has imparted for me. And I couldn't do it on my own. And I always tell people I'll never be grateful to the people that assisted me. And I'm using the opportunity to assist someone else. Because there's a difference between success and greatness. It is successful that we achieve all this. But greatness is when you use what you have to help somebody else to achieve what you have. And maybe even more. It's like I was successful in building a house. But it would be greatness if I assist someone in building a house. Because they'll always remember. It ain't everyone would come back and say thank you, but some would remember with the disciples. And
you're a biblical man.
Yeah, there are people.
You know the story of the lepers?
Right, where one came back.
Only one came back and said thanks.
Right, but everyone have a conscience.
Yes.
In spite of their coming back, they remember that someone make it possible. But it is life, and sometimes it did what it. So I want to say thanks to the general public for supporting us over the years, and continue. And I hope to see you again sometime again, and working for you.
Mr. Griffin, it has been a pleasure.
It has been a pleasure being working with you too.
Okay.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Working for You. I want to thank our callers, or there was one caller. I want to thank him for his input, and I want to thank all of you who listened to today's program. Those of you who continue to listen to Working for You every week. We have some very, very faithful listeners. We want to thank you very much as we continue to keep you abreast of what the government is doing for you, how the government is working for you. Next week, we will be back, and we are going to have the Ministry of Tourism. Of course, you did mention, Mr. Griffin, that tourism plays an important part in our economy, and in fact, right now, it is the mainstay of our economy. Next week, we will be back. I am your host, Lesroy Williams. Until then, have a good time.
Working for you. A weekly talk radio program which highlights developments of national interest and the activities of your St. Kitts Nevis government. Join host Lesroy Williams as he presents news, views, reports, and interviews about everything regarding the activities of the Team Unity government and the building of our communities and the development of St. Kitts Nevis. Tune in and call in to interact with your government and share your views regarding the upward forward development of your community and our beautiful Twin Island Federation. Working for You is weekly, every Wednesday live from 1:30 p.m. to 3 p.m. on ZIZ Radio, Win FM, and Sugar City FM with rebroadcast on participating stations. Working for You.